were that you talked about, or those people who did those things that impacted your life, it wouldn't take too long to figure out that they were determined people. They were determined to start something, or they were determined to get things done. Nearly 2,000 years before the time of Jesus, God came to a man named Abram, and he gave him a command, and then he gave him a promise. He was to go to the land of his father, to the land that God would show him, and then God would cause him to father a great nation. So Abram went as the Lord told him. That may be one of the most important statements that we can read from the Bible. So Abram went as the God told him. Well, you may remember that Abram was 75 years old when God first approached him. And yet, with God's leading him, Abram started something after that age. He started a new people. He started a new nation. And you know, as you think about it, that's the way faith really is. God speaks, and we obey. And as I pondered these thoughts while I was preparing the sermon for this week, I thought about us as a congregation. I thought that talking about Abram as he was approaching 75 was not too far different from a whole lot of us. You see, we're now being approached by God. He's calling us when a lot of us are either younger, slightly, or somewhat older than Abram. Building a new church, preparing for new ministries, taking a new attitude about what the church is and what the church will become. You see, God is calling us to all of those things. And as Joyce said in her prayer about me, the same thing is true about all of us. God will not lead us to anything that He won't be there to see us through. We hear God's call and we obey. God speaks and we get into action. And sometimes that's all that is needed of us. Our biggest obstacle to anything is oftentimes lethargy. We simply need to get moving, to doing what God is asking us to do. You see, today's lesson takes place nearly 25 years after God first called Abram. Abram is 99 years old by the time this lesson comes about. And we all agree that that's not an age when you're considered to be exactly a spring chicken. But you see, Abram is not done yet, even at 99. He has followed the Lord's leading. He's followed it from the very first time the Lord called him. But the Lord has been slow to reward Abram's faith. Welcome to the real world. Sometimes God does seem a little bit tardy in answering our prayers. And maybe that's another lesson that we need to hear from this message this morning. God doesn't always do things on our timetable. We know, even though He doesn't do it in our timetable, we have the faith, that promise I talked about earlier, that he hears our prayers and he will act. Abram and Sarah are still childless at this time when Abram's 99. And they're got to be wondering, how in the world does God expect me to form a great new nation when I can't even produce one child? And Sarai certainly has to be wondering the same thing. And they, after 25 years, after the promise, they certainly have to be wondering and about ready to give up. Maybe they even think that that original promise was nothing more than an illusion. But they continue to persist. They continue to persist in faith. Then the Lord does appear to Abram again after 25 years, and he reaffirms that promise that he made so many years ago. But this time he states it even more forcefully. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. And God changes Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. At 90 years of age, Sarai's promise comes true. She bears a son. And from that son comes countless heirs to Abraham and Sarai. Their physical and their spiritual descendants are without number. You and I are considered as spiritual and physical descendants of Abraham and Sarah. That's an amazing story from two people. And you see, God's table may not be our timetable. Another way of looking at that is that God's promises delayed are not God's promises denied. Abram and Sarah waited a long, long time to realize God's promise. And I'm sure they didn't like waiting any more than you and I like to wait. We grow impatient, even with God. And yet we know that God is faithful to his promises. And we know, like Abram and Sarai, we will be rewarded if we don't grow weary and give up the ship. And we also know that God's purposes are grander than our imaginations can ever imagine. Abraham and Sarah certainly had to have dreams in their earlier lives. They dreamt about what they were going to do as a career. They dreamt about children. They dreamt about grandchildren. And yet they never had any. And they almost missed that opportunity of having children and grandchildren. Do you think that even in 1,000,000 years they ever dreamed that you and I would be sitting here today, 3,000 years later, telling their personal story? Not only that, do you think that they imagined that billions of Christians and almost a like number of Jews and Muslims around the world would be telling their story today? They couldn't see that their lives were part of a grander purpose, but God did. It was through this elderly couple that God blessed the world in a unique and an eternal way. You see, we cannot see, like Abraham and Sarah, God's grander purpose in our lives either. And we are, each and every one of us, in one way or another, unique in a way that is known only to God, in a way that we may never understand. But it does give proof to something that I like to talk about very frequently. And that is that whatever you and I hope for, whatever you and I are about, we have to know that if it is to be, it is up to me. God expects us to work for and find our purpose in how we react to God's call. You see, you and I think too small. If we can only imagine what God has in mind with our lives. Think way back, 1858. A Sunday school teacher in Chicago, Illinois, named Ezra Kimball, became interested in the spiritual welfare of a young man who was a shoe clerk in a local shoe store in town. And after debating about what he should do about this young man, Kimball one day started down to Holton's shoe store where the young man worked. And he actually walked by the shoe store once or twice, wondering whether he should really go in and talk to the young man. He finally got up the courage. He went in and talked to this man. He found him in the stock room, and he talked to him about his faith in God, his faith in Jesus Christ. The shoe clerk showed a lot of interest to him that morning was named Dwight L. Moody. Many of you may not know that name. Dwight L. Moody became one of the greatest evangelists of his day. But that's only the beginning of what God would do through that Sunday school teacher's witness to that shoe clerk. Dwight L. Moody went on to preach a crusade in England. And in 1879, he awakened the heart of Frederick B. Meyer, a pastor then of a small local church who became well known as a renowned theologian of his time. In fact, later, Meyer was preaching at Moody's church in Northfield, Massachusetts. And there was a young man in the back row who was listening to him, and he heard Meyer say, "If you're not willing to give up everything for Christ, are you willing to be made willing?" These words transformed Mordecai Ham to come to town to keep a revival spirit alive. In the revival, Mordecai Ham was heard by a young man who heard the gospel and claimed Christ for his profession of his faith that day. His name, Billy Graham. Do you think that Sunday school teacher, 150 years before, trying to get up his courage to share his faith with a young shoe clerk in Holton Shoe Store in Illinois, had any idea that that would result ultimately in touching millions of lives through Dwight L. Moody, Frederick Meyer, Wilbur Chapman, Billy Sunday, Mordecai Ham, and Billy Graham, and all the people who have been touched by Billy Graham's ministries? You see, you and I think too small. God has imagined greater things for your life and for mine than we can ever imagine if we just simply trust Him. In trusting God, our lives find the greatest fulfillment. Following Christ is not just about building God's kingdom. It is also about finding the abundant life within you, within ourselves. What I am saying is this: when you follow God's leadership, you not only play a part in God's great plan for all of creation, but you find the most fulfilling life for yourself. Abraham and Sarah did as God commanded, and God rewarded them far beyond their wildest dreams. Not as quickly as they might have thought, but God did reward them in His own time. They became a blessing to the entire world. And then they had a rich, fulfilling life as well. So can we, my friends. So can we. I want to suggest to you this morning that none of us are too young or too old to find a purpose. As many of you know, I did not find my real purpose until I was ordained at the age of 68. And some people today have great difficulty accepting the fact that I'm 82, because I look so young.
You're not 82 yet.
And next month. And recover so quickly and so well from the health issues. And I'm still able to be a vital part of God's ministry right here in this church in McAllen, Texas. Well, I'm convinced there's a reason for that. I'm convinced it's because I found a purpose in life and that I'm truly happy doing what I do. But you don't all have to go to that extent. You don't have to go to seminary and be ordained. You don't have to go out and be a minister. But we can be an ear for somebody who needs someone to listen to them. We can, as some people do, provide transportation for somebody needing that service. We can be a gopher for somebody who cannot go to the grocery store or the pharmacy or whatever it is to run their errands for them. We can simply take a good meal to somebody who is not able to cook or get a meal otherwise. We can join a prayer chain.
Good idea.
We can pray for others. We can be involved. It's amazing the things we can do at any age if we just think about it and if we commit ourselves to it. Or another way of saying we commit ourselves to it is just saying, yes, God, here I am, choose me. I will follow you. You know, when I have difficulties, I call my sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he always, I know what he's going to say when I call him. He always gives me the same words of advice. And he says, go out and find a wet one. By that means he says, go out and find somebody who still has the problem. But a deeper meaning underneath all of that is, get out of yourself and find someone else to help. Find someone else to whom you can be of service. The feeling you can get from getting out of yourself and serving others can be amazing. You see, our greatest purpose in life may well be to know, to love, and to serve God. And maybe the best way to do that is to know, to love, and to serve all of God's creation. Amen.